is a God who reigns above, the God of all creation, the God of power, the God of love, the God of our salvation. He fills my soul with sweet relief and makes my faithless murmur cease. To God all praise and glory. To God all praise and glory. To God all praise and glory. God all praise and glory. Yeah.
Welcome back. This is our midweek message at the table, or spending some time at the table still. Even though we're taking a little bit of a break today, I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you're a part of this break. I'm glad I'm a part of this break. We all need breaks in life. And so the things that we're going to be focusing on today comes from a word you probably know, but you've probably not spent a whole lot of time engaging with, and in ways that maybe have been terribly life-changing. I hope you have, and if you have, that's awesome. Okay, I'll stop beating around the bush. The word is Sabbath. As I say that word, what sits into your heart? What sits into your mind? What do you think of? Sabbath. It's a wonderful word, and we're going to learn a little bit more about it today. But a little bit about the context of where I am. This is a cool place, and I'm practicing Sabbath a little bit today while I'm here. This is Camp Chestnut Ridge, which is in Efland. It's right up the road from us in Burlington, a little bit down the ways from Hillsborough and Durham area. And this is a retreat center. Lots of kids come here and play and have camp throughout the summer. And they enjoy canoeing and they go to the farm. They do a lot of fun things. But today, it's a little extra quiet. We're out here and I'm helping lead a retreat for new incoming Div students, Duke Divinity, as they enter in their first year at the school. They're taking a time to ground themselves in Sabbath, rest. So as we're out here enjoying the nature and the quiet, we're experiencing all that God is offering us in this beautiful space. I love being out here. I love engaging with Sabbath. It's a little bit new even for me on what that looks like. But it goes back a long ways. For me in particular, I remember as I was growing up in my life, when I was at school, when I was at church, when I was at my own home or somebody else's home, there was always a sense of placement and an idea of who I was supposed to be, how I was supposed to act in particular, especially as my parents told me. I'm supposed to act particular ways at my home and probably very different ways at someone else's home. You might have experienced that as well. How I ought to be, or as my father-in-law calls it, act like you got some sense. That was something that I grew up around a lot, and my wife Sierra grew up around that as well. And it was always a troubling time, moving from place to place and going from these different contexts and having to act a little bit differently. We learn about that as we grow up. But I wonder, how are we really, in general, ought to be in the world, in God's kingdom, in our life and our journey with Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit that walks alongside us? What does that ought to be? What do we ought to be? So we're out here engaging in Sabbath, learning a little bit about that. And as we move from place to place in these beautiful, nature-filled, forest-filled, animal-filled areas, we see places where God is calling us to be. God is calling us to be today quiet for these new Div students. Quiet and reflective over what they are about to experience at Divinity School, what they are about to experience in their new life. We are out here, we find the nature that calls us to be connected with it, creation that is calling us to care for it, The community garden around the corner is a great place to be in creation with the earth, with plants, tending to them, how we ought to be in this world. As I think about that, it's really a bigger ideal than what we grow up with. How we ought to be from place to place, and especially as we move into our adult lives and the conversations around purpose come up. What is our purpose in life? Oftentimes that comes to what are we supposed to do? But Sabbath teaches us it's not about doing. It's about being. From the very beginning, this is what God's intent has been for Sabbath. It has been a place for us to learn how to be, how we ought to be. In fact, there's a word that goes along in the Hebrew text very often with Sabbath, with Shabbat. The word is menuha. Menuha doesn't have a direct translation to our English understanding, but tranquility, peace, the sense of what you ought to be, how you ought to be. That's what menuha means. Sabbath is a place to experience that. I hope that you have found places in your life to practice Sabbath. I hope that you have found places where you understand what it means to be a creature, what it means to be a child of God. I want to give you an opportunity to think about that. If you haven't lately, or you haven't in a long time, or you haven't ever experienced what Sabbath could be like, I want to leave you with an opportunity right here to try it out. So for 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it ends up being, to watch some footage of some beautiful nature clips, to listen to some music, settle in, and allow yourself to just soak in. Sabbath is not something that we do, not something that we give. Sabbath is something we receive. So receive this.
Been waiting on a moment, been waiting on a sign, waiting for them to call your name when you're next in line. Been waiting for your time to come, your 15 minutes in the sun. So don't you find it strange that God, He made 4 seasons and only one spring? So just let the ground rest, 'cause if it's not right now, it's for the best. You're gonna grow, I know this, but for now, just let the ground rest. Been waiting on a moment, been waiting on a sign, waiting for the lights to change when you won't feel so stuck and so left behind. Been waiting for the day to come you can leave behind what you've become. Wash it all away. 'Cause flowers only grow once they've tasted rain. So just let the ground rest, 'cause if it's not right now, it's for the best. You're gonna grow, I know this, He'll finish what he starts. He started this, I know. But if you saw the plans, maybe you wouldn't go. I watched him plant a seed and then let the ground rest. So child, oh believe, 'cause I promise there's a harvest.
So what did you receive from that? I wonder, what about that experience, that idea of Sabbath, why do you think it was so important to God to give to people from the very beginning of creation? Why might it still be important for you going forward? Just a question, something for you to think about. Now, from that, you may have received very little, and that would be very close to what I received when I first started engaging with Sabbath. It's the place where I learned and engaged with Sabbath first was at Duke Divinity School, and I was sitting in a class, and there was a professor who was talking about Sabbath, and she had slides going along the way, and of course we're all sitting there taking notes, and she gets to one and she says, "These are all the books that I think are wonderful books that talk about Sabbath." And I'm sitting there writing down the names of the books and the authors, and then finally, after a few seconds, she says, "Now if you're sitting here writing down all of these book names for you to read later, I'm not sure that's the best place to engage with Sabbath." Here I am, thinking that I can read all about it, understand it as best I can. But no, it's really the place of experience, trying it out, getting a sense of what God is calling you to do in these moments of quiet reflection. That's where Sabbath really takes a turn. I imagine the disciples were probably practicing that often as they were walking with Jesus through Jesus' life. And they probably did not do that very well at the beginning, but maybe they got better about it. There's a place in Mark chapter 2 where Jesus is walking along the way with his disciples, and the disciples, they're hungry, they're in need, and so they pick up some grain and they begin to eat. Well, the Pharisees, they stop and they see that the disciples are eating grain on the Sabbath, and they say to Jesus, "Why are you letting your disciples eat?" Now, it wasn't lawful, it wasn't unlawful for them to eat or pick grain on a regular day. But on the Sabbath, it was considered work, and they weren't supposed to. And Jesus meets them with this profound story. He comes back and says, "I'm surprised you didn't know. I'm surprised you haven't read about the time where David being an ancestor that they all would have known and relied on for how they should live, a source of inspiration. I'm surprised you didn't know that David and his own companions, when they were walking along and were hungry, went into the temple and ate the consecrated bread." Wow. Not just grain from the field, but the consecrated bread inside the temple. Jesus, he is challenging the priests in their understanding of what Sabbath looks like. It's not regimented in doings, but it's in beings. It is this idea of menuha that we talked about earlier, where it is a place of how you ought to be. For the disciples, they learned this. They were hungry. They were in need. And through eating and walking with Jesus, they found satisfaction. I think that's the place where they probably understood menuha, how we ought to be. It's a place of satisfaction, of being presently aware of everything that's going on and not needing anything, having everything taken care of, having Jesus in your midst, and everything settling into place. And Jesus reminds the priests in that moment at the end of this scripture that man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. Sabbath was a gift given to us. Now, after that first practice that I had at Sabbath, which was collecting information, reading books about it, I did give it a try. A couple of months ago, I went to Camp Chestnut Ridge, and I took my phone, and I took my watch, and I left them in the car, and I spent the whole day from 9 a.m. till about 4 without any of that technology, without any of that connection to the rest of the world. And I worked in the garden a little bit. I ate lunch with people. I spent some time in silent meditation. And I'll tell you what, when I walked away from that experience, I felt as though I had just received a deep tissue massage. And I don't know about you, but if how I'm ought to be feels like a deep tissue massage at the end of a day practicing Sabbath, that's what I want to look for on a regular basis. That's a peace and an assurance that I want to find each and every day of my life. Sabbath, it's a break, it's a rest, but it's a practice at how we ought to be. It's a practice at eternity. Friends, I hope that you are inspired to find your own practices of Sabbath in your life. I hope that you are looking for ways in which you can find rest. I know for some of you that probably sounds like a scary thing. For me, it does from time to time. There are seasons in life that are just too busy. I don't feel like I can take that break. But for us to settle into this idea of Sabbath being something created for us from the very beginning, and that God is giving it to us as a gift, and we are called into that on a regular basis. A regular basis. I wonder how our lives would change from that. So we've taken a break. Sabbath is something that we have walked with for a little bit. Now, next week when we join together, we'll be continuing the story that we started with Joseph. Now, after Joseph, we'll be moving into the Exodus story. And these stories are powerfully connected. Joseph sets up the place for the Israelites to be in Egypt. Now, for Joseph and his family in that time, they weren't slaves, but there's something that happens in there where they do become slaves in Egypt, and continues that story that we know well of how they leave and find their way to the promised land. It's a strange connection, but a familiar one I think we're going to find even in our daily lives. So please come back and join us next week as we continue this story. After we've taken a break and a rest, we've taken a deep breath, and now we can dive into the work that Exodus is calling us into. And so I'll see you then.